This is Invested in Climate with Jason Rissman. I see climate as the world's biggest, most diverse, most important movement in human history. Millions of people dedicate themselves every day to protecting the planet. This podcast shares conversations with advocates, entrepreneurs, investors, policy experts, and anyone else that can push our thinking about what's possible and what needs to happen to address climate change. If you have ideas for episodes or feedback, get in touch on LinkedIn. If you enjoy the show, please leave a rating on Apple or Spotify. I'm currently building a new venture. It's related to storytelling and how we engage all sorts of folks in meaningful climate action. If you have expertise in this area, big ideas, or examples of something that's really working, get in touch. Thanks for listening and for doing whatever it is you're doing to support climate progress. Okay, let's get started.
In California, we now have more electric charge plugs than we have gasoline nozzles. And I would say 99% of the public does not know that. There hasn't been the level of attention for some of these cutting edge applications in the electrification space yet. And we got to change that. And we got to get people as excited for electrification this next decade as we've been for renewables this last decade. And really, this is kicking off a 10-year campaign from 2025 to 2035 to electrify the American economy.
Hi, folks. I'll admit it's not often these days that I'm talking to climate leaders, particularly those working on policy, who say it's an exciting time. This conversation was like a breath of fresh air. It's not getting the headlines it deserves, but innovation is literally electrifying our country. Sector by sector, state by state, our economy is being transformed by electric technology replacing outdated fossil fuel applications. To elevate and accelerate this wave of innovation, Hawaii State Senator Chris Lee and California Energy Commission Chair David Hochschild have teamed up to launch the Electric Innovation Initiative. The initiative is starting with an awards event during New York Climate Week, recognizing breakthrough electrification projects with $10,000 cash awards. But beyond this event, the initiative is a 10-year campaign to showcase innovation, advance learning, and shape policy. In this conversation, we go deep into the context of why the Electric Innovation Initiative is needed, what sort of progress is happening at the state level, how states are learning from one another, the many benefits of electrification, and much, much more. I learned a lot in this episode and was thrilled to hear there's much to celebrate in a still growing electrification movement. Hope you learn as well. Enjoy. David and Chris, welcome to Invested in Climate. Very glad to have both of you here with us today.
Good to be here.
Great to be here.
Well, we're here to talk about electrification and renewable energy, how momentum has shifted, and what it means for state and local level action. Before we dive in fully, let's have you two introduce yourselves a bit and the roles that you're playing today. David, let's start with you. Many people have heard of state energy commissions, but don't necessarily have a grasp of the work that you do. Would you mind giving us a bit of an intro on your background and help us understand what you do at the California Energy Commission?
Yeah, so I'm David Hochschild. I'm chair of the California Energy Commission, and we're California's primary energy policy and planning agency. We have about 700 staff, and we're working to get the state of California to 100% clean electricity, as well as to advance energy storage, solar, wind, microgrids. We set all the energy efficiency codes and standards for the state, and we support what I believe is the best clean energy research and development program in the world, and really helping drive clean energy mainstream across the state through a whole bunch of different programs. I've been in the energy space for about 25 years and was in Silicon Valley in the solar industry most recently before joining the Energy Commission.
Fantastic. Chris, over to you. Tell us a bit about your background and how energy has been central to the work that you're doing as a state senator in Hawaii.
Yeah, I've been really fortunate to serve in the Hawaii State House and Senate now for the last 18 years or so, and really got involved in energy and some of the work that we've been doing, because in Hawaii, we're a series of isolated grids. We cannot rely on our next neighbor over for support. We're feeling the effects of climate change and those impacts. And frankly, we can't wait for other people to come in and solve these problems for us. So got involved and been working not only in Hawaii, but around the rest of the country over the last decade and a half or so.
Great. All right. Very good. Well, thank you both for saying the context. Let's talk about why you're joined together for this conversation. You're partnering on a new initiative called the Electric Innovation Initiative. David, can I ask you to tell us about it?
Yeah, so this is a really exciting initiative that we're launching this year on September 24th. And basically, the idea is this: the grid across the United States, in literally every state, has been getting cleaner. Last year, 96% of the capacity additions on the electric grid in the United States were from clean energy sources like solar and wind and geothermal. And really, the real focus now that renewables are cheaper than fossil fuels across the country is to extend the reach of that clean electricity to end uses that displace fossil fuels. So we're kicking off a national award ceremony with Secretary Jennifer Granholm, former Energy Secretary Jennifer Granholm, which is going to be giving awards to some very compelling projects that are happening in all sorts of electrification applications. And just to give an example, the kinds of things we're seeing now in the market that aren't getting attention, the city of Oakland became the first U.S. city to completely electrify 100% of its school buses, 74 buses, 74 chargers. We're seeing the very first battery electric ferries be deployed in the San Francisco Bay and across the country, cutting edge electrification projects on EV charging infrastructure and heavy duty charging, building electrification. In our state in California, we've gone from 1% of new construction being all electric to about 80% today. And the idea is to recognize some of these projects that are happening at the state and local level across the U.S. and give them the attention and the celebration that they deserve, to be followed up by site visits from colleagues in state legislatures around the country. And that's where Chris's role is especially important. He's chair of the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators, which is 1,500 state legislators working on these issues. And we want to bring legislators to come see these projects, really because this is where we can go on offense in this really challenging time, is at the state level. And so I'll turn it to Chris for some more public commentary on that.
Yeah, over the last, actually, since the early 1990s, state legislators have actually been collaborating mostly behind the scenes, working on trading best practices, ideas, bills, basically using each other's strengths and the laboratories that are the 50 states to figure out what works in what state, and can it be replicated? Can we learn from each other? And that's really one of the big ways that policies on all issues, not only on energy and environment, but on transportation, on housing, on healthcare, and all the things, really make their way around the country. And usually what happens is once you have enough states adopt something, then the federal government will finally, being dragged kicking and screaming along, do something about it and take some action. So we have a network of legislators, Democrat, Republican, from all 50 states and territories. And we work together on a regular basis to figure out what makes sense, what do we do, and how do we replicate that so that everybody benefits around the country. And that's something that we really want to use because it's been one of the most successful tools in deploying policy, especially in this moment when we know there's a ton to do, when the focus is really on the states and local governments to take action. I think especially on energy and these other issues, that there is a lot of nuts and bolts policies we can put in place at the ground level, not only to accelerate deployment, but to help figure out all the pieces of the puzzle that need to be addressed to actually go from project conception to projects in the ground and local benefits to ratepayers and customers and new jobs being created and savings for consumers across the board. So I think a pipeline for that. And that's why this is so important to really have a conversation between states and across state lines.
David, Chris, tell us more. Why is this initiative needed? All of these best practices, all these things that are going right in the field, shouldn't that be well known and amplified on its own?
Well, it's a great question. And it's a little bit perplexing to me how little attention these incredibly significant developments have been getting versus, for example, what's happened on the electric grid, where solar and wind are quite well socialized and are quite popular. People understand the technology and folks know that these technologies are clean and growing and they know what they are. Meanwhile, a lot of the electrification stuff that's happening has been largely below the radar. Just as an example, in California, we now have more electric charge plugs than we have gasoline nozzles. And I would say 99% of the public does not know that. And there hasn't been the level of attention for some of these cutting edge applications in the electrification space yet. And we got to change that. And we got to get people as excited for electrification this next decade as we've been for renewables this last decade. And really, this is kicking off a 10-year campaign from 2025 to 2035 to electrify the American economy. And, one thing I think is also very compelling about this is this investment and these policies are now taking hold across the world. China now gets the majority of their new vehicles, over 50%, from electric, and it's growing. And so we at the state level and the local level will be joining with many local, state, and national governments around the world in this effort. And I think there's just huge value in generating more attention and focus and excitement about this space, because this is where we can really make things happen.
David, Chris, you mentioned the need to the offensive, and particularly at the state and local level. With the rollback of federal clean energy incentives through the recent bill that went through Washington and shifting executive priorities, the landscape has changed. Help us catch up and understand, what has the impact of the new administration's policies been so far on the march to electrify the United States?
Well, look, you can't put the energy transition genie back in the bottle, okay? So I do believe it's possible to slow the energy transition. I don't believe it's possible to stop it. And that is what the Trump administration is doing by rolling back clean energy tax credits and essentially doing the bidding of the fossil fuel industry. It will slow progress, but there's still a lot we can do to move things in the right direction. And what the states are capable of doing is making investments and setting best practice policies such that the energy transition can still be moving forward at a healthy clip. If you think about the underlying subsidy and tax credit landscape, right, in our country, we've been subsidizing fossil fuels for over a century. The oil depletion allowance, for example, began in 1926 and continues unabated today. There's no sunset for that, for a fully mature and profitable industry like oil. Meanwhile, the tax credits and subsidies for renewables have been much fewer, and they've been intermittent. We've never really had long-term programs. So the Inflation Reduction Act was the first time that long-term policies, in excess of a decade had been set up for those. That unfortunately lasted just a few years. So it's really incumbent on state and local governments to step up where the federal government has stepped back. And the nice thing about doing an initiative at this time is that the technology has really arrived. And we're seeing, electric vehicles with 300-mile plus range. We're seeing better and better technology and energy density and batteries and lower cost and more safety and new innovation that is really stronger and better than it's ever been. And luckily, our job right now is just making some local and state investments and best practice policies that can help the public access this incredible and dynamic new electrification technology that's on the market.
Yeah, I'll add in, the loss of the IRA sucks, and it's going to be felt for sure. Most of the impact on states, just from the recent ugly bill, is not going to be felt actually for months yet. It's going to manifest in budget losses to states kind of all around, where there's going to be cuts to education, cuts to healthcare services, cuts certainly in the innovation space that we're talking about right here. And there's going to be a scramble. States and policymakers are going to be asking, what can we do? And what's really exciting is, just in the last few days, we had what I'm told is the largest convening of state elected officials focused on energy and climate that's ever happened. And it was almost 200 state legislators talking about these very issues and what to do. Part of the whole effort that David and myself and some others have been working on is, how do we give people policy options? How do we say, all right, here's what you can do? Because in most elected officials' minds right now, the future is still the future. When you think about electric innovation and innovative transportation and all these other things that are going to be coming to market, we're still thinking in 5, 10-year, 15-year increments out. It's going to be up to somebody else who comes after me, not me right now today. And by connecting these leading edge examples of electrification with policymakers today, letting them meet the people who are behind those, the people that are doing the development, and the policymakers in those places that are moving these things ahead, you not only get a sense of this is happening now, and we have an opportunity to do something now, but there are tools that we have available that we can replicate from state to state to state and really make progress at a time when policymakers are craving options for how to do this, because Democrat or Republican, red or blue state, conservative, liberal, does not matter. There's innovation that is happening out there. As David mentioned, this is inevitable, but the question of speed is going to be upfront. And are states going to move and grab onto those savings, that investment, that job creation, or are they not? And that's something where we all want to see across the board, that kind of investment in our local communities. And so the question becomes, how do we get people together, not only to open their mind and say, hey, this is happening now, but also here's what you can do about it. And that's exactly what this is all about.
Let's go a bit deeper right there and get more tangible. In this post-IRA environment, what should states and cities be doing to recalibrate their strategies and regain momentum?
Well, to give you an example, one of the things that's been talked about significantly is how do we fast track projects, right? There's a series of deadlines coming up rapidly. Some projects are not going to make it, but there's still an opportunity for others. So what do we do to make those happen? How do we deal with permitting, for example, that puts in place, a lot of barriers and a lot of bureaucracy to get something moving? How do you deal with stabilizing financing in an environment where it's difficult for anybody to make an investment because there's so much uncertainty in the market, uncertainty coming out of Washington, and uncertainty all around? What do we do to clear the road so that you have multiple layers of government, federal, state, and local, that are aligned, so that, for example, you might not need to, as a project developer or as a, whatever the thing is, the widget is that you're trying to deploy and scale, that you don't need to go through a whole process at the city level or at a county level, because you already qualify through a pre-approved pathway that's been vetted at the state level. So you can deploy in multiple cities all at the same time without having to replicate the wheel over and over and over again.
Yeah, I'd really build on that point about permitting. At the Energy Commission, we pushed out grants over the last year and a half to 347 local jurisdictions in California to do fast track permitting is one example. So for behind the meter storage and behind the meter solar, which in many cases was taking 60 days to get the permit, and now it's an over the internet one day thing you can do on your computer. We want to expand that to be able to permit electric heat pumps and, for example, home electric vehicle chargers, and make it a friction-free process. So that's a really important step local and state governments can take. And then just generally with programs that are offered by states and local governments, one of the things that's really important, I think we've learned, is to establish long-term programs and avoid short-term stop-start incentive programs. What we really need to get costs down is to create a very stable policy environment that has a long-term runway so that you can get investment that's going to help these industries scale. And scale ultimately is what drives costs down. That's what's worked for solar. It is the reason why we went from solar panels costing $5 a watt in 2000 to costing 15 cents a watt today. It's just a function primarily of scale. And so we really want to help expand best practice policies at the local and state level to help do that.
David, let's learn a bit from California's example. California now has a grid that runs on more than 2/3 clean electricity, with major advances in electric buildings, fleets, and ports. What were the most catalytic policies or programs that enabled this sort of progress?
Well, one of the things I'll say, good judgment comes from experience, and experience comes from bad judgment, right? And we made a lot of mistakes early on. I think the biggest mistake we made was what I was talking about, doing short-term policies where you have a solar incentive program for a year or two and then it runs out of money. And we really moved to a whole different philosophy, which we call sustained orderly development, to achieve the market transformation that we want. And so virtually every important policy that guides our climate strategy today is a long-term policy. We have a 2045 goal for the electric grid to get to 100% clean energy by 2045 and to get to 90% by 2035. And so these stage gates along the way with that long-term 20-year outlook really help. And the same is true of all these other programs we have established, our carbon neutrality law, and we have a 7,000 megawatt load flexibility goal and a 6 million electric heat pump goal. These are very long-term targets that provide a sort of stability in the ecosystem that has unlocked a lot of investment that wouldn't occur otherwise. And if you think about one of our landmark programs was our Million Solar Roofs program. And when that was first created back in 2007 under Governor Schwarzenegger, the solar market was very mature. But once we got a $3 billion 10-year program in place, it unlocked all this investment that then created new innovation. Even like not all of it was technology innovation. Some of it was financial innovation, like the solar lease, which had not existed before that. And so that's the benefit you get of long-term stable policies. And now, of course, we have, over 2 million solar rooftops in California, and, solar's come down enormously in cost. And so that's the basic idea, to provide long-term stable policies that will help costs come down faster.
Chris, what about you? Hawaii was the first state to mandate 100% renewable energy and commit to a carbon negative economy, including zero emissions transportation across all modes. What design policy choices made this possible, and how are you navigating implementing challenges?
Yeah, those were some of our biggest and probably most important wins, not only just because they were the first of their kind and served as models that could be replicated elsewhere, but because they really set that North Star and provided certainty to the industry to say, look, this is where the state's going. We're committed to this. We're going to do what we can to make sure that we get there and help our partners in the private sector deploy whatever technologies and projects that need to be done to achieve that. That was 2015 was our 100% RPS. That was 10 years ago now. And we're at a place, first of all, where we've seen significant investment in Hawaii behind the meter with rooftop solar. We're at a point where more than 1 in 3 single family homes have solar, and they're now getting batteries and as a result, EVs, because it just makes all the sense in the world once you're there. And we've seen on the utility scale side, a whole lot of projects, storage projects, utility scale solar projects, wind projects, and so on, really deploy. We've basically almost quadrupled the amount of renewable energy that we're producing in that time period. And what's really great about that is the lessons learned. And to David's point, we didn't do it perfectly either. We had a lot of side steps and a lot of lessons learned. But the great thing is now we can share those with every other state, with every other community, and trade practices back and forth. We're learning from California, on how to do EVs right, how to deploy charging infrastructure, how to do a lot of things just the same. And if you are able to do this at scale, not just in our states, but beyond, you can really transform an industry, transform the economy. And if you look back to that 10 years, 2015, we did the 100%. That was the first state. It was Hawaii to do that. Now, fast forward 10 years, almost half the states in the country have adopted the same or very similar laws and policies. And that's creating a net effect of rapid transformation and creating a marketplace in the industry where people can invest and scale rapidly in these places that have said, we're doing this, we're going to be there to help you.
Let me put an explanation point behind what Chris said, because his story is really evidence you don't need to be a big state to make a big difference. Hawaii was the first state in the U.S. to accomplish that goal, thanks to Chris's incredible leadership and his colleagues in the legislature. And we did our policy in California in 2018 based on Hawaii. And by the way, it's a lot harder to do it if you're an island. If you are a state with contiguous neighbors that you can draw power from, like we are in California, it's easier. So for them to achieve that was an incredible step forward. And, just to highlight, we're at 2/3 of our power coming from clean sources. This was considered mythology even 7-8 years ago. The fact that really alternative energy is the wrong word to use to describe renewables in California, fossil is really the alternative energy. I mean, that is, I think, very exciting to me, because things can go from being considered mythology to being mainstream faster than conventional wisdom might expect. And it's also very hopeful to me when you think about states as laboratories. There could be some best practice policies that come out of very small states around the country that could then laterally be adopted by others. And, in our case in California, we're now, as we've been decarbonizing, we've gone from the 10th biggest economy in the world about a dozen years ago to now the 4th biggest economy in the world. And we're the most decarbonized large economy globally. And it's happened pretty rapidly. And I'm kind of excited about what we in our state can learn from other states. I mean, nobody has a monopoly on good ideas. And I think that's one of the exciting things that states offer and local governments offer when we get best practices. In fact, I just learned about a practice Oregon is doing on permitting expediting, which I want to learn from and implement. And our team is working on that today. So a lot of important dialogue happening between states as we go forward.
Chris, let's turn to you. Hawaii was the first state to mandate 100% renewable energy and commit to a carbon negative economy, including zero emissions transportation across all modes. What policy design choices helped make that possible, and how are you navigating implementation challenges?
Yeah, it's an exciting time. We have about 7,500 elected state legislators all around the country. In the last 2 election cycles, about half of those have been newly elected, either filling vacancies or, beat somebody else along the way, but they're all new. And that means you got half the people in the country who are in a place where they put in the time and effort. They want to help their communities. They want to advance a lot of projects. Now they got to figure out how to do it. And that's where the network of legislators comes together, because you now have a lot of veterans in some states that understand the process, understand, the machinations of government and how things work, finance and industry, and can help new lawmakers do things rapidly. And that's part of the secret sauce to being so successful all these years at replicating, renewable energy policies and all kinds of things that we've seen really make a difference across the country. So we are partnering. Electric Innovation is partnering with the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators so that we can give folks a look at not only the latest innovation in our economy in the electrification space, but also help them connect with the industry side leaders to figure out what are the barriers, whether it's permitting or financing or anything else, that we can then turn into policies to change in states around the country and really just advance electrification, advance innovation. And the most exciting thing about that is, we're a bipartisan group. We have Democrats, we have Republicans, we have independents. And the message from everybody, and we just heard this at this meeting I just told you about, where we had almost 200 state legislators convene, which included Republicans. One of the leading Republicans who spoke had basically said, look, at the end of the day, we all live in communities where we want to succeed. We need investment, we need jobs, we need lower prices. And frankly, at the end of the day, we collectively built this nation over the last 100, 150 years on innovation. We didn't just stop at the horse and buggy. We said, no, we got something better. We're going to go with that. We're going to build the car. Now we've got better options beyond that. And we have an entire industry, an entire economy that is ripe for change. And the fastest way that we move into the 21st century and maintain American dominance is to electrify our economy. And that is something everybody can get behind because it means jobs, it means lower costs. It threads the needle between polarized politics we see out of DC and on the nightly news and brings people together. And that is something we think through this partnership between the National Caucus of Environmental Legislators and Electric Innovation will help do for electrification over the next 10 years, what we had collectively used the exact same strategies for to achieve the success on renewables that we've seen over the last 10 years. So I'm super excited. I think there's a path. I think there's a lot of motivation out there in spite of everything people tend to see online. And I think there's a really great group of people willing to step up and do it.
Chris, I'm going to double click because it's not often that I hear someone on this podcast say it's an exciting time. I used to hear that a couple of years ago. A lot of people would say it's an exciting time. But let's go deeper into, with all the things that are going, headwinds and tailwinds included, well, why is this an exciting moment from you for your lens at the local and state level?
Well, look, I mean, we can all see the gridlock coming out of DC right now, or, hostility towards some of these policies. It is unfortunate. I think it sets the country back in many ways, especially when it comes to competition overseas with other competitors. But because of the lay of the land here, we have state and local governments. And for the average person who's not paying attention to that stuff, we always wake up thinking like, who's the president and what is Congress doing? But for like 90% of the stuff that affects you throughout your day, from when you get up and walk outside, what kind of streets you drive on, what kind of education your kids getting at their school, what kind of food you're able to buy, and is it safe? All of that stuff in many ways is decided at the state and local level. And just in the same vein, a lot of the project deployment for electrification, for renewables, for all these things, go through barriers predominantly at the state and local level, permitting, all that stuff that we've been talking about. So here we have an opportunity to actually do something meaningful about that at the state level, where there is support to do something, where there are a set of people who are going to work across party lines that we hear talking to each other behind the scenes. You might not see it online, you might not see it in the news, but behind the scenes, those conversations are happening, but they're just happening in different ways. Because people are saying on the Democratic side, hey, we want to address climate, we want to decarbonize, we want to create jobs. Republicans are saying, hey, we want cost savings, we want industrial growth, we want to be competitive, we want jobs too. And where those two things intersect, there is opportunity to do a lot. And that is something that I think this next year, we're going to see a lot of progress on in states around the country. And if you look back over the last decade or so, frankly, during the first Trump administration, when there was a lot of hostility and uncertainty toward climate policy and renewables and everything, we collectively at the state level probably did more to put more policies in place and advance things than we saw in the 4 years before or the 4 years since. And I think that's the opportunity now, out of not only sheer response, where we have to do something to keep our economy going, to keep investment going, but also because this is a moment where I think we can even do more than before. Because the first time around, I think everybody responded and said, you know what, we're going to react to the situation. This time around, knowing that that wasn't just a one-time fluke, but there could be future administrations that might be equally hostile, means that at the state level, we can not only respond, but we can build out a political infrastructure that can last and transcend administrations, no matter who's in the White House, no matter what Congress does, because we can build out the lines of financing, we can put the right policies in place, and we can coordinate between states to do more than ever before. And that has never really been done in the climate energy space to the degree that I think it's going to happen this time.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think in life, sometimes when you feel the most powerless, you may actually be the most powerful. And, to Chris's point about what happened during the first Trump administration, when he came in, remember he campaigned in 2016 on coal. Well, what happened from that 4-year period, 2016 and 2020? More coal got retired under Trump than under Obama. That was the period in California when we adopted our 100% clean energy law, when we adopted our climate neutrality law, when we adopted a requirement for solar panels on every new home in the state, and did some of the biggest seed planting in terms of climate investments we've ever done, $50 billion of climate solution investment in California. That really was a kind of interesting counter reaction to the first Trump administration. And so there's a lot we can still do. I think at the end of the day, energy policy in the United States, most of the power still rests with the states. What happens in public utilities commissions, interconnection standards, permitting, tax credits, renewable portfolio standards, state research and development programs, and all kinds of other policies, those levers are still largely controlled by the states. It can be slowed, that is true, but it can't be stopped.
David, Chris, equity is often cited as a goal, but implementation often lags behind. As we build a new energy future, there's a lot of talk of it being more equitable. What concrete strategies have you seen succeed in directing electrification investments like school buses or HVAC or appliance upgrades to underserved communities first?
In our state, we've been putting the lion's share of funding in many of these funding categories into the communities that have borne the heaviest burdens in terms of pollution. So about 60% of our electric vehicle charging infrastructure has gone into low-income and disadvantaged communities. About 70% of our clean energy research and development funds have gone into projects in low-income and disadvantaged communities. And then we have programs like the HERO program for heat pump installations, which are going 100% into low-income and disadvantaged communities. We also have a big program around tribal energy sovereignty. We have 109 federally recognized Native American tribes in California, and we've funded 35 tribal grants to do solar battery microgrids and so forth. And that's something that I think the whole policy community and the state supports. And when we're able to make these investments in these communities that really deserve it, and we're proud of that, we're going to keep doing it.
I'd add, I think the lessons learned from the last 10, 15 years as renewables, solar, and other things really started to proliferate, I think people have taken to heart, so that you don't only have those who can afford the upfront cost as the early adopters win out with more benefits than those who follow. And I think this time around, as we get into broader electrification and investment and things like that, you're going to see a lot more focus on trying to figure out how to make sure that no one's left behind. And those are conversations I've been a part of hearing from across the country at multiple levels. So I really do think that is something that's on top of everybody's mind, because if it's not, and it doesn't work out that way, you're really going to see winners and losers. And that slows the whole effort down. And that makes the policies less effective and frankly subjects the policymakers to criticism from various communities. And that's not something anybody wants to see. So I do think there is really good momentum there.
Fantastic. Gentlemen, looking ahead to 2035, if we are successful at scaling electrification across key sectors, buildings, transportation, industry, what does the future look like in practical terms?
I think an electrified future is clearly good for clean air and for climate. And I think it's also really good for our economy. I think it will open the door to a whole nother sector of the innovation economy, and also, interestingly, good for the electric grid itself, because as we are electrifying, we're working hard to make sure that everything that connects to the electric grid is a good citizen of the grid. And the electric grid is much more robust when there are many, many different points of interconnection and generation and virtual power plants and so on. And so I think it's a more resilient electric grid as well.
I think David's right. I think the more you're able to tie things together, electrify it all, you're going to see products compound on one another and build on success, like you see apps in the App Store, since the advent of the iPhone. Build on the different technology, build on the capacity each has, and really provide stuff that 10 years ago we never would have even dreamed of. Frankly, I wouldn't be surprised if you end up seeing my childhood dream, which was always the 2015 of the future with hoverboards that everybody can ride around on. That kind of thing is like around the corner. Maybe not that specific technology, but certainly the proliferation of those kinds of technologies. And right now we have a vertical aviation boom. You got companies around the country going coast to coast, working on stuff like that. That kind of thing, I think, will become the norm, where you'll see a lot of that stuff in action in different places in ways that we simply couldn't imagine. Even AI, on the radar to the extent that it's become just a few years ago.
You guys have painted a great picture. What can folks do if they're listening to this? Is it just about supporting the electric products that are in the market? Should they be calling their state senator and asking them about policies like this? Should they be calling up the Energy Commission? What should folks be doing?
I think there's one thing that comes to mind immediately, and I'm not going to get fully up on my stump here to give a stump speech on this, but everybody has a voice. Everybody's voice can count and can be meaningful, no matter how much we feel like we don't matter sometimes. And I feel frustrated too. But I've seen more often than not, a handful of people raise their voices about something, catch the attention of policymakers because they have to respond. And all of a sudden, that discussion becomes a discussion. And once you have something that's forced into a conversation, there's got to be an end to it. And so there's an opportunity for people to weigh in and say, look, we still have a path forward here on all these things, on creating better jobs, on reducing costs. And I want to focus on the cost for a minute, because when we talk about affordability, there's nothing people feel more than the pinch in their pocketbooks that they're feeling right now because of lack of sudden jobs, because of tens of thousands of federal workers suddenly out of work, on top of all of those throughout various industries that are now searching for jobs, on top of insurance prices that are climbing as a result of climate disasters and many other things, on top of just the escalating cost of everything that we need to really take into account. And one of the ways that we can meaningfully address that going forward is by lowering our reliance on costly imports, on costly fossil fuels, on costly this and that, and electrifying things because they're more innovative, they're cheaper, they're better. And if you just look at an EV, for example, you don't have to pay for gas anymore. You don't have to pay for all the moving parts that normally would require servicing and belt changes and oil changes and all of that. You don't have to deal with a whole bunch of stuff. The technology is fundamentally better and it's constantly improving. So even if it's a wash today, you can make investments that will save you money 5 years from now, 10 years from now. And that's true not just in the transportation space, it's true all across the board. And as more and more products and more projects come to fruition and scale and deploy, that opportunity for savings in the long run will be bigger and bigger. So the faster states can listen to their public, the faster people can reach out and say, hey, my elected officials, can you do something about this? The quicker those savings are going to manifest and the quicker those things are going to be felt in the job market.
David, take us home.
Let me just close with a note of optimism. I do believe we're going to prevail. And the English writer Rory Sutherland has a really wonderful thought experiment he proposed. He said, look, imagine that we're at 100% electric vehicle penetration, right? And that's just normal, driving around in clean electric cars. And somebody comes forward and says, hey, I have a great idea. Let's take a flammable liquid fuel and let's put it into vehicles and create this really complicated internal combustion engine. And then you'd ask, okay, well, is the driving experience better? No, it doesn't accelerate as fast. Well, is it quieter? No. It's much, much louder. Is it cheaper to drive? No. It's like twice the cost per mile to drive. Is it easier to maintain? No. Way harder to maintain. There's 250 moving parts in an internal combustion engine compared to 7 in an electric drivetrain. And, at the end of the day, this technology is better. And so we're going to win because it's kind of a one-way valve. When you see people who've used an electric car or other electric devices, the experience is better. It's cleaner, it's quieter, and the technology is getting better and more affordable every year. So we're going to prevail long-term, and we've got to keep the long view in mind here. We have to get through what I think will be a very challenging next couple of years with the environment we see in Washington, D.C., but we will make it through. And ultimately, as we do that, we have to totally depoliticize this space. It's really important. The initiative Chris and I are working on with our colleagues is a bipartisan initiative. And we have to make electric vehicles and electric devices kind of like what our cell phones are, which is, we don't have debates about smartphone technology. It's just something that's universally used. It's not a subject of political debate and so forth. And I believe we can do that. This stuff is good for our country and it's good for clean air and climate. And so we're gonna prevail in the long run. And this strategy leading into state success is really the way forward. Thanks for having us, Jason. Enjoyed it.
Thank you both. Best of luck.
Appreciate it.
Thanks for joining us for this episode of Invested in Climate. Please remember to rate us on Apple, Spotify, or Google. Find show notes, sign up for updates, get in touch, and visualize your climate action at investedinclimate.com. This podcast is for informational and entertainment purposes only and does not constitute financial, accounting, or legal advice. Thanks again.